Good day everyone, Dr. Polaris here. The Nandi Bear, or Chemosit, is a cryptid reported from the highlands of western Kenya in East Africa. Usually described as a shaggy, slope-backed predator reminiscent of a hyena, it is widely regarded as a composite cryptid, created by lumping together reports of different kinds of distinct animals. Some of the cryptids or folkloric beings united under the name Nandi Bear include the aforementioned Chemosit, the baboon-like Cordelo, and the Chalicotheres. Other names applied to it include the Mbende beast, Nyangao, and several variations on the name giant forest hyena. Outside of the typical Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot reports, the Nandi Bear was one of the first cryptids that I read about when I was young. There was a section in the Walking with Beasts companion book about it, stating that living Chalicotheres may explain the sightings of African Nandi bears. So this is going to be a particularly nostalgic video for me. Most cryptozoologists regard the core Nandi Bear sightings seen by Williams and Hicks to be a single cryptid, although even this is sometimes split into two separate entities, a hyena-like animal and a baboon-like animal. Identities put forward for it range from misidentified hyenas to giant prehistoric baboons. Although regarded as a monkey by some tribes, eyewitness sightings of the Nandi Bear uniformly describe a shaggy animal very similar to a hyena. Its size is consistently given as roughly 4 feet at the shoulder, about as high as a lion, and all reports note that its back slopes down from the shoulders. The head is said to be notably large, with unusually massive and powerful jaws and teeth, and a stumpy bear-like snout. The ears are small, or round, and its tail is usually reported to be rather short and tufted, while the feet are said to be large and hairy. The colour of this fur is said to be tawny to gingery brown to dark black. The earliest known sighting of the Nandi Bear was made by a certain Geoffrey Williams and his cousin with the Nandi expedition to the Usain Gishu in 1905, although Williams did not report the sighting until 1912. He reported seeing the animal, which was 5 feet high and both sat-like and greatly resembled a bear, sitting on its haunches near the Sigorit Rock. Before he could do anything, the animal shambled away with a sort of sideways canter. A spate of sightings, which introduced the Nandi Bear to the wider world, occurred during the construction of the Magadi Railway in British East Africa, principally in 1912 and 1913. The most famous of these sightings was that reported by railway engineer G.W. Hicks on the 8th of March 1913 at around 9 a.m. Travelling to a railhead via a motor trolley, Hicks saw what he initially took to be a hyena. He noted, "It was almost on the line when I first saw it, and at that time it had already seen me and was making off at a right angle to the line. As I got closer to the animal, I saw it was not a hyena. At first, I saw it nearly broadside on. It looked about as high as a lion. In colour, it was tawny, about like a black-maned lion, with very shaggy long hair. It was short and thick set in the body, with high withers, and had a short neck and stumpy nose. It did not turn to look at me, but loped off, running with its forelegs and with both hind legs rising at the same time. As I got alongside it, it was about 40 or 50 yards away, and I noticed it was very broad across the rump, had very short ears, had no tail that I could see. As its hind legs came out of the grass, I noticed the legs were very shaggy right down to the feet, and that the feet themselves seemed large." Hicks realised afterwards that the animal was the unknown bear which had been seen recently, and considered stopping to pursue the beast, which he could still see in the distance, before remembering that the other engineers were still waiting for him back at the station. He intended to return to the spot during the return journey to examine the tracks, but they had been washed away by the rain. Shortly afterwards, the native servant of a certain Mr. Archibald claimed to have seen a very similar animal, which he said was standing on its hind legs. A subcontractor, Mr. Cavigia, had already reported seeing a very similar animal that previous year. Sightings continued into the 20th century, and in and around 1914 one was reported to have been killed near Kapsawar after killing several villagers. Another example of a man-eating Nandi bear struck in the same year in an unnamed Kenyan village, where it killed a 6-year-old girl. Colonial Administrator William Hitchens was dispatched to hunt the beast, and though he had set up a perimeter around his tent, during the night an animal with the most awful howl he had ever heard tore down the tent and carried off Hitchens' dog, leaving behind enormous clawed tracks. A couple of years later, a giant hyena apparently killed 12 cattle near Tuso, and sometime before 1936, a settler in Transnozoia claimed to have been attacked by an 8-foot-tall animal which looked like a grey polar bear, which broke into his hut. Some of the latest sightings have occurred on the Chemoni tea estate in the Nandi Hills. In 1957 or 58, Douglas Hutton supposedly shot 2 large, 3.3 feet tall at the withers, hyena-like animals with sloping backs, heavy manes, short broad heads and small ears. The bodies were laid out in the factory and were seen by staff, who later described them, before being sent to Corendon Museum, Nairobi, where they were identified as giant forest hyenas. A very similar incident is alleged to have occurred on the estate in 1960, when naturalist Angus Finlay Hutton encountered and shot a bear-like animal which stood between 4 and 5 feet high, with long gingery hair, a sloping back, round ears, massive jaws and teeth, and a short tufted tail. The specimen was sent to Corendon, where Lewis Leakey identified it as a long-haired brown forest hyena, and, due to its importance, had sent it on to the Natural History Museum in London by sea, leading to the material's disappearance en route. How convenient. Another similar animal, described as a lion-sized, shaggy-haired hyena with huge teeth, was shot elsewhere in Kenya by a big game hunter in 1962. In an additional 1960s incident, engineer Angus MacDonald claimed to have been chased around his hut in Kipkabus by a 7-foot-tall ape-like animal which ran both bipedally and quadrupedally. The latest known sighting occurred on the Chemoni estate in 1981, when some locals claimed to have seen a nyangao, which is Swahili for dirty dog or bloody brute, which was a wild animal which was not a hyena, a baboon or a pig, and which was described similarly to the animal shot by Douglas Hutton. Although the Nandi Bear's tracks have frequently been described, no known casts were ever made, and only one image exists. A rough sketch made by Fritz Schindler of a track found in mud near the Magadi Railway. Bernard Hoovelman suggested that this track was in fact 2 honey badger footprints, one superimposed over the other. As mentioned above, no less than 5 or 6 Nandi Bear specimens have allegedly been shot over the years, only to disappear upon being sent to London's Natural History Museum, or, in one case, the Corendon Museum. The material thus vanished includes a skin and a skull, an entire specimen, an unknown amount of bones from 2 individuals, and some photographs. Some have suggested that the Nandi Bear could be explained by spotted hyenas, especially rare red-furred individuals, which would appear unfamiliar. However, other than the physical details, many of the Nandi Bears reported behavioural attributes which are inconsistent with spotted hyenas, and Captain Hitchens wrote that hyenas are so common around African villages that a villager confusing one with a Nandi Bear would be like an Englishman confusing a rabbit with a fox. Another species, the brown hyena, does indeed have a bear-like head, a short or unnoticeable tail, and a very long brown shaggy mane, though it is also a small species, rarely exceeding 2'5" at the shoulder, and has large pointed ears. At least one Nandi Bear specimen was formally identified as a brown hyena, an animal which Lewis Leakey wrote had been shot several times in Kenya, but was still scientifically undescribed. Although any mistaken identity other than a brown hyena is not considered a good explanation for the core Nandi Bear sightings, the shaggy animal seen by Williams, Hicks and Hutton a number of supposed Nandi Bear sightings described very similar animals can be explained by mistaken identity, as first explained by Bernard Heuvelmans in his On the Track of Unknown Animals. The most notable of these are the multiple sightings occurring in 1912, multiple times during the 30s, and on other undated occasions, which refer to an animal as relatively small, with black fur and sometimes a pointed head. Heuvelmans felt that these sightings referred to the honey badger, which sometimes turns entirely black as it grows older and larger, presenting an unfamiliar sight. To explain the shaggy, slope-backed animals often described as giant hyenas, many cryptozoologists have turned to the fossil record. Heuvelmans, in his original examination of the case, felt that a good identity would be some form of giant baboon, perhaps similar to the prehistoric Dinopithecus, based on the animal's appearance and behaviour as well as its reported gait, which was identical to the pithecoid gallop of monkeys. The Mao, Nandi and Wapokomo people described the Nandi Bear as an ape or an enormous baboon, and some early investigators such as Captain Hitchens and A. Blaney Percival also theorised that this animal may be a monkey. Giant baboons, far larger than any known species, have also been reported from East Africa independently of the Nandi Bear. Perhaps the most well-known theory, first proposed by Charles William Andrews in 1924 and later supported by Louis Leakey, is that it may be a living Chalicothere, a horse-like animal with a sloping back. This theory originated with the discovery of very recent Chalicothere bones in Uganda and the observation that Chalicotheres were contemporaneous with the ancestors of the Okapi, which famously still exists in the Congo rainforests. Chalicotheres, however, were herbivorous animals and were presumably slow-moving, completely contrary to most Nandi Bear sightings. It has also been suggested that the Nandi Bear is an actual ursid. Bears are notably absent from modern African faunal communities, but they once did inhabit the continent. The Atlas bear, a subspecies of brown bear, was native to North Africa until historical times, but never managed to move south of the Sahara. Older fossil bears have been found in sub-Saharan Africa from Miocene deposits, but these belong to the massive Agriotherium africanum, which stood up to 9 feet tall and weighed in at up to 900 kilos. These dimensions are far too large to apply to the generally 4-foot Nandi Bear. In light of the Nandi Bear's hyena-like attributes, which are especially apparent in the most recent accounts, Carl Schuker has suggested that it may represent a living relative of the short-faced hyena, Pachycrocota brevirostris, also known as the cave hyena, which was far larger than any modern representative of this group, and is known to have lived in East Africa until the late Pleistocene. Almost all of the more recent Nandi Bear sightings describe the animal as a giant hyena. Whatever its identity, or identities, no sightings of the Nandi Bear have been reported since the 1980s, and much of its alleged range has been deforested and transformed into farmland and towns since, though the most recent sightings emanate from regions which still have forests. It is very likely that all of these sightings described pertain to a range of misidentified familiar animals, from unusual hyenas to overly large baboons. As such, there is no one Nandi Bear, and the name is simply used for the sake of convenience. As with all of the other African cryptids examined on this channel, the Nandi Bear appears to be a product of wishful thinking, misidentification, and stereotypical dark continent thinking on the part of Western hunters and ranchers. Thank you for watching, everyone. I'll be back next week with more speculative evolution content, so don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more. Cheerio.